Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Everyday Anarchism. I'm your host, Graham Culbertson, and my guest today, I guess I'm just going to go with game designer. My guest is Jay Dragon, a game designer, and I think there's a lot more than game designer that I could put after your name, but why don't I start where I like to start? Jay, why don't you tell the people what you do and what you're interested in?
Thank you so much for having me, Graham. Hello, my name is Jay Dragon. I am the editorial director at Possum Creek Games and lead game designer at Steve Jackson Games. I am a multi-award-winning queer disabled game designer, best known for her work on Wander Home, Yuzeba's Bed and Breakfast, and the upcoming 7-part Pact. I am well known for games focused on community, community conversation, engagement, like engaging with the world, and the magic of the mundane.
All right, wonderful. So my first awareness of your work came, I think a couple years ago. I started teaching classes on games, and both many of my students and some of my friends were like, hey, you should check out this thing called Wander Home. And I got this game, Wander Home, and I gotta admit, I had no idea what to do with it. I mean, I'm not a big tabletop RPG player. I'm much more a kind of like, I don't know what you would call them. Like, they used to be called Euro games, but now that category is split. Like hobby board game type thing. Dominion, Race for the Galaxy. And I just looked at Wander Home and I was like, this is one of the most beautiful works of art I've ever seen. I don't know how to play it. And I think part of your work is messing with the boundaries of what a game is, where storytelling and games and life collide. And that for me is the kind of anarchic energy that I'm looking for. I don't know if any of that resonates with you.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think there's two big factors there. One of them is tabletop RPGs are, one way to describe what tabletop RPGs are, and I don't think this is the only way, but one way to think about them is in the same way that, like a board game, the medium of the board game is the board, right? Tabletop RPG, the medium is the conversation that's happening, right? If we're all sitting around talking to each other, the game that is being played onto the conversation. There's people who would argue with that. I would maybe nitpick that, but it's useful for getting there, right? And so in that way, right, a lot of my work in tabletop RPGs kind of comes from a desire to think about the way groups of people engage and conversate with each other. And which, sometimes with Wander Home, right, it can be beautiful. It can be, if you're not versed in that tradition, maybe it can be a little tricky on how exactly you approach it, because it's easy, to, I think, make a thing and take for granted what people are familiar with. But, that is certainly a big factor there. The other big factor is my parents are both dyed-in-the-wool leftists. David Graeber was a family friend. We got, wiretapped during Occupy Wall Street. There was kind of I grew up kind of in a very, like a lot of kind of New York City artists, a lot of New York City kind of intellectuals. And certainly I've had a lot of issues with, I think, the spaces I grew up in, of course, because that's what it is. But it also means that, like, a lot of what I'm working on and thinking through is versed in a culture of bringing anarchism, Marxian, kind of Marxianism, bringing kind of a lot of that work into games, and also kind of leaning into the history of that kind of work in games.
Yeah, good. So, I mean, to stick with this anarchism concept, one of the first things I noticed when I was looking at Wander Home is that it uses a system called No Dice, No Masters, which
absolutely
is a rep. So the standard tabletop game, still the standard is this game called Dungeons and Dragons. I'm going to go ahead and assume everyone listening to this podcast at least has heard of Dungeons and Dragons.
Dungeons and Dragons is kind of it's always the elephant in the room, right? It's like I've heard people talk about, in fantasy, they say Tolkien is like the Mount Fuji of fantasy, where it's like in every single piece of Japanese like ink work from the Edo Meiji periods, if you can't see Mount Fuji, it's because you're on Mount Fuji. And I think similarly, Tolkien and I think Dungeons and Dragons is also, if you can't see where the person is trying to get away from Dungeons and Dragons, that's because you're in Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love that. I love that. I mean, I love the ukiyo-e reference,
Mm-hmm.
and I love the Tolkien reference as well.
Mm-hmm.
And Dungeons and Dragons, it can look like, Graeber famously said a conversation is a form of anarchism, which is why I think podcasting is
Mm-hmm.
so amenable. It can look like a conversation in the free flowing way that you
Mm-hmm.
described, but there's one person at that table who sits in a hierarchical or at least
Mm-hmm.
a different level of power from
Yeah.
everyone else, the dungeon master.
Mm-hmm.
There's no master, no master in Wanderhome. So I guess if we
Mm-hmm.
can just talk about
Yeah.
that for a bit. This is so
Sure.
thrilling.
So there's the origin of the dungeon master in tabletop RPGs comes from Kriegspiel, which is wargaming. That's when we would be German generals and we'd have our little Napoleonic like battles. And we kind of map it all out. We'd play a Kriegspiel. And there were two kinds of Kriegspiel that were popular. There was strict Kriegspiel, which was where there were very strict rules on how the game is played, and it was just two players and we'd go at it. The other kind was called Free Kriegspiel, and Free Kriegspiel had very flexible, very improvisational rules. But you needed someone to referee that, right? You couldn't play Free Kriegspiel without a referee of some kind. And so the referee became this figure in that style of play that became very important. As the
Mm.
referee kind of evolved, and as Dungeons and Dragons in particular evolved from that, you get this culture of a group of people gathering and then one person kind of overseeing and being responsible for the world. And over time, especially in the tournament scene, because there was a tournament scene at the time, they took on more and more authority and eventually became someone who brought the world and brought the game, and you were all playing in their game. I think a lot about the really interesting tension between different ways of learning how to play games. And how there's almost a liturgical quality to Dungeons and Dragons, right? Which is that one person goes off and they learn the sacred texts, and none of the rest of you can read or understand it, but they learn it. And they come to you, and once a week they preach to you about the true meaning of the text, and you exist in and agree with their reading, or you have to go your own way. And I think that there's a lot of value to that approach, right? It is really helpful to be able to sit down and play a game without needing to know the rules of the game. I think like dungeon masters, DMs, GMs, Wanderhome actually has an equivalent sort of called the guide. And the guide's responsibility is to, if you're in a group that wants to have a guide, the guide helps show you how to play the game and helps set up the world and kind of helps take on that stuff if you're unfamiliar. But I very intentionally said this is not a game where there's a master. This is not a game where there's someone who wields, I think, who there's not someone who is the true font of the game or a referee of the game, right? There's not someone who kind of the game, there's not a central figure of the game and then secondary people. If we want to play the game, we all need to learn it together. We need to study it together. We need to think about it together. And maybe it'll be helpful if we're anxious to have someone who is more experienced to help show us the way. But in that way, it's like if you can think of different modes of building a community around a book, which is what a lot of RPGs are, right? When we play Dungeons and Dragons once a week, we are building a small community around a book. There's a long history of communities built around books throughout culture. And I think that I am much more interested in the book club approach, or even the the Torah kind of approach of like, let's all learn this and let's all talk about it, rather than the liturgical Christian, priest on the pulpit explaining to the masses how it is supposed to be done approach.
Yeah, I was going to reference Quakerism
Mm-hmm.
as you were talking, but actually before that, I need to go back because I'm now struck by one of these really fruitful, for me at least, maybe not paradoxes, but seeming paradoxes. So if you go back and talk to
Mm-hmm.
Kriegspiel, you say if something has really tight rules,
Mm-hmm.
the players don't actually need an authority figure.
Mm-hmm.
So, like if you're playing checkers or chess with your friends, unless someone is out and out cheating and like palming
Mm-hmm.
things or whatever, the rules themselves provide the authority, and so there's
Mm-hmm.
no need for an authoritarian decision maker, but also there's no freedom. Then in the Kriegspiel you're talking about, or Dungeons and Dragons, there's
Mm-hmm.
tons more freedom, but there's also the fear that the vessel of the game itself will just sort of burst, right? Like if people are just like, yeah, screw this.
Hmm.
I don't really care. Now the orcs can fly and it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So somehow the dungeon master is an attempt to grant players freedom while
Hmm.
keeping the system intact. Does that make sense?
So there's an article I wrote last year called "Rules Are a Cage and I'm a Puppy Girl," which was kind of an analysis on the function of what are rules doing in games and why do we have them. And my big claim is that rules are best understood as restrictive measures, right? Rules are restrictions. That's kind of like what they are doing. And what makes rules noteworthy in games is that they are restrictions we are opting into, right? When we sit down, we play, let's say we play chess, we are agreeing that pieces move in a particular way, and also that the movement of pieces means something to us, and that there are goals that we might not otherwise give a shit about, right? Because I could come over and I could declare, hey, checkmate, right? I can that means nothing if we're not playing chess, right? Chess is an agreement to give it this meaning and this weight and this pressure and this restriction. Much in the same way, like with BDSM, with kink, we can understand, right? You put handcuffs on, you are limiting your movement. That's on purpose, right? If the handcuffs snapped when you pull on them, they'd be unenjoyable for play. In the same fashion, we want rules that are rigorous, not because we need authority, but because it is pleasurable to feel friction, right? To feel pressure. I think where it gets kind of strange, right, is it's like, well, if we need that feeling of rigor, if we need that feeling of pushback from somewhere, right, if the rules themselves feel very ironclad and can give that to us, then we can derive that pleasure from that relationship. If we want the rules to feel less ironclad, we have to find another source for feeling that pressure. One option, the one that Dungeons and Dragons takes, is the dungeon master, right? It's okay, and there is someone who can provide. Like, we are, and that's why I think the notion of the antagonistic GM, the evil GM, is very common because they're acting as a source of counter pressure, right? They're the authority figure, they're the mom, they're the dad. But then also, right, where else can we get that? One way in a lot of more high trust groups is from what's called the diegesis, or the shared fictional reality, right? Which is like if we're playing a Lord of the Rings game, we are going to agree that we could play Lord of the Rings right now, you and I, just by agreeing we're going to make believe in a world in which Lord of the Rings is true. If it wouldn't happen in Lord of the Rings, we can't put it into the game. And now the authority, we've still found a source of the authority. We found a source of the rigor. It just doesn't have to come from the rules of the game or from the rules of the dungeon master, but from the rules of the world. If you have a very high trust group, you can produce that rigor just from all of you applying that pressure to each other equally. But I think what is kind of the interesting challenge, right, is it's that and this is one of the ways in which a game is different from real life, right? It's that in real life, uh, rules are not ultimately voluntary, right? Like they are enforced through state violence, right? Like you want freedom from a rule, great. This is why the state exists. It will crush you. But in a game, if you want freedom from a rule, you stop playing the game, right? It is so easy to not play a game. It is we are constantly not playing games, and so we because we're not playing games, we want the rules to like it's almost like the flip side of a lot of the community organizing I'm really invested in, where it's like a lot of like working with people is really about how do I make them feel free. And in games, it becomes a lot of how do I make them feel productively restricted, right? How do I create the feeling of pressure and friction and restriction in a way that is very pleasurable, that is very that enables them to feel more creative than they would if nothing meant anything.
Yeah. No, that's all just so wonderful, Jay. That's wonderful. And I mean, of course, you don't know this, but this idea of the relationship between rules of the game and government and walking away, it's come up a few times on this podcast. It's such a productive way of
Mm-hmm.
thinking. That was
Yeah,
brilliant. And
I'm so glad. Yeah.
this goes back to my like initial confusion of what to
Mm-hmm.
do with Wanderhome, because
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't find the friction at first because I was
Mm-hmm.
looking for, what might be called, Mary Midgley has like a really like a one sentence long definition of a game that's like,
Mm-hmm.
a struggle, a rules bound struggle against an opponent or the odds.
It might
And
be a useful definition you might be looking for. Bernard Suits defines a
yeah,
game as unnecessary obstacles in pursuit of an arbitrary goal, which is, I think, what you're getting at, right? It's like, well, what's the arbitrary goal? What are the obstacles, right? In basketball, I want to get the basket and the ball, and the team's trying to stop me. Here, what am I trying to do, and where am I trying to go? Yeah.
have you been reading Teen Nguyen, Jay? Because
No.
okay, so Teen Nguyen, his book Games
Oh,
Agency.
yes.
Sorry,
Sorry.
yes,
Nguyen. Yes.
yeah, sorry.
Yeah. No, you're so good. Yes, I know Agency is Art. I actually complicated opinions on Agency is Art. It's a good book. Anyway. Yes.
Yeah, you don't look.
I'm a big game studies sicko. I have to be, right. It's like I like
Yeah,
to know
no,
I like to know what I'm doing.
yeah, it's I know that. I mean, that's wonderful. And I just was thinking like this. Uh, Suits is so hot right now. I think in part because of that Nguyen book,
Yeah. Which is
and
also interesting because I think I disagree with Suits' definition, right?
yeah,
The definition I
yes.
just gave you doesn't actually, I think, hold up that well in a lot of cases.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't hold up that well. I agree. And then so first of all, just to get the game studies thing out of the way, I think Tina Nguyen's book is wonderful. He's been on this podcast, and as much as I find the book so productive and useful, and I'm not like convinced by its arguments for
Yeah.
both the Grasshopper and Game Agency as Art, but with Wander Home, it's not clear that you're trying to put a ball through a hoop, and that. But I mean, I have decided that Wander Home is a game, and you do play it. But you need more than this sense of like, I want all the cards on stacks on the top and none of them on the stacks on the bottom, like Solitaire has. It's something you're doing something else, but you're still. It's important that the words that you have written, sorry, you being Jay Dragon, not like you, not the general you, the words in this book of Wanderhome are restricting the
Yeah.
reader. Otherwise, it's just make believe. And somehow
And I
there's
think,
some.
yeah.
Go ahead.
I think that, and in Wanderhome, right, Wanderhome has very few rules. It's got its little set of what I call axioms towards the start. I don't call them that in the book, but I call them that in my head. And one of them is, there are things like you are animal people, the world is beautiful, right? That livestock are bugs. There are things that, like, if you break one of them, it's still kind of Wanderhome, and if you break more than one, the game falls apart, right? Like, these are just kind of like foundational agreements on what is happening in the fiction. And one of them is the world was at war, but it is no longer. There is no violence here anymore. And that, to me, is the really critical rule, because that says, hey, like, the boundary between this and make-believe is that you can't actually do anything you want. There is actually, right, the capacity to commit violence against another person has been taken off the table. And that means that whatever happens next, right, you kind of have to, I find, to me, the most fruitful moments in Wanderhome are the moments when I realize, like, I'm with a group of players, I'm running Wanderhome, we're playing Wanderhome together. They hit a moment when they would normally reach for violence, and then they realize no, and then they have to step back and figure out what else to do. Wanderhome was kind of an exercise in, like, how few rules does a game need, and, like, what else can a game have in order to be coherent as a game. My more current work, kind of the stuff I've been involved with more, is much more about, like, well, now that I know what rules do, what happens if I, like, really go hard on them, and, like, well, how can I think about still, what does it mean to break, what does it mean to push against rules? I recently wrote a manifesto called the Expressionist Games Manifesto, where I talk a lot about how I think that an important function of games that I like a thing that I'm trying to do, and not in Wanderhome, but in kind of my more later stuff, is to make games in which you are a passionate, conceptual kind of inner self, and you exist in a world that, through the rules of the game, heavily restricts your capacity for inner expression. And then you must figure out how to express yourself within the confines of the rules. My joking, kind of very simple version of this is, like, imagine if you and I were playing chess, but we are pretending that we are two people who are hopelessly in love with each other. And we cannot vocalize that. And the chessboard is the only way we can articulate our love for each other. And the game rules of chess still apply, but instead of playing to win, we are playing with the knowledge that this is true. and to figure out how to self-express. And I feel like that is kind of the big thing that makes RPGs different from a lot of the struggle games that Nguyen talks about, which is the difference between a game where like, oh, I'm trying to win, I'm trying to it's the struggle to win, versus the struggle to be present, like the struggle to self-articulate, the struggle to like sit with the world and to like allow it to be with you, and to know like, okay, like I can't just write a book, right? I have to be present with the other people, I have to be present with the thing. These are the things that are restricting me. And the thing that I'm being, like, the thing that like I'm trying to kind of come to grips with myself, but I only have a limited palette of self-articulation.
Can we talk about rules lawyering now?
Absolutely, I would love to.
Because
I need to also tell you about a game I've been working. Talk to me about rules lawyering, and then I'll tell you about a game I've been working on that seems very relevant.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about rules lawyering. I guess I should do the polite thing. That's also correct to say everything you said was excellent. That's why I just jumped on, because I was like, I don't.
You're just like, yeah.
Yeah. But then there's this thing called rules lawyering, and actually. Let me not explain why I'm interested in rules lawyering first. You're the expert. Can you tell the people what rules lawyering is? Because some people, again, they have never played D&D. Mm-hmm.
So rules lawyering is an interesting thing where you take advantage of it is a tension between the formal rules of the game and the social rules of play. So if, for example, we're playing a game, and I have figured out that through careful and precise reading and manipulation of the text, I can produce an outcome that is like selfishly pleasurable, but unenjoyable for the rest of the table. And that's considered to be like a social faux pas. But because of that I'm being selfish in my play, right? It's for me, it's not for anyone else. And because of that, and so like there's a tension between like, well, yes, the thing you've put together is technically articulated in the rules of the game, but in the social fabric of the game, it's considered to be unacceptable play. Rules lawyering, also angle shooting is another word for it. Like that style of play. I think it's in competitive games, it takes on kind of like a bad sportsmanship quality, but in cooperative games or like RPGs, it becomes more of like a problematic philosophy, I guess.
Yeah, this is great. A problematic philosophy. Because I think also, so one of my students, I should give a shout out to her right now, Caroline. Shout out to Caroline. I'm sure she's going to listen to this episode. When I told her about this interview, she said, "Oh, have you read the Expressionist Games Manifesto?" And I said, "No, I haven't."
Yes.
And then I went and did. And I'm pretty sure in that manifesto you say, like, I want rules lawyering or something like that. And
what I want is pro-social rules lawyering. Because the whole thing I described, right, if we think about the thing I described, which is a careful reading of the text to produce particular outcomes, the problem lies in the fact that those produced outcomes violate the social conventions of what the game is supposed to be. However, that is not necessarily how it has to be. That is a byproduct of the design of the game. One of the big things I've been working on lately is 7-Part Pact. It's a very ambitious, very convoluted game where you are the 7 most powerful wizards in the world. You are expected to be men. You each wield utter power over your portion of the world. You are the GM of the world, right? You are each the GM of your portion of the world. So this is the opposite of Wanderhome. Right? This is a game with masters. This is a game with dice. This is a game with powerful, cruel men treating the people around them like objects to be manipulated and to get power from. Right? It's in every way it's the opposite, and it's game design wise it's the opposite as well. Right? It's an incredibly complex set of like 8 interlocking board games. That is a game where the rules speak to a constructed truth about the world, right? The world works the way it does because the wizards believe it to be so, right? There is a pact that has articulated reality in this way. And the wizards, and they engage with the rules of the game, are engaging with the world. One of those fundamental rules, as I said, is that wizards are men. What happens if you're not a man? Right? You're violating a rule of the game. Can you find language in there that lets you find ways to not be a man? Can you find language in there that lets you treat your wife better, right? The rules of the game set you up to exploit your wife for emotional labor. Can you find a way to treat her better? Can you, the rules of the game set you up to be at odds with each other. Can you find ways to work together anyway? So in that case, rules lawyering goes from being a mode of problematic play through combative play to being something that you are using to self-articulate and self-express, right? When I rules lawyer in Seven Part Pact, it's because I am trying to find a better world I'm trying to find a way to break the game so that I can be happy, right? So that I can be authentic and true. Because if we think about, like, what is it to, like, if we think about rules as serving as useful metaphors for systems, to rules lawyer becomes figuring out how to manipulate a system to your own ends, which can be very selfish and very destructive, but can also be intensely liberating and vital for marginalized people, right? We have to learn, like, I, as a trans person, have to learn how to manipulate the system to my own goddamn ends, right? That's, getting your name changed, getting health insurance to cover surgery. All these things are about manipulating systems, rules lawyering systems, right? The whole reason being trans is considered a medical condition is partially from history of medicalization, but partially because it's useful rules lawyering. So all of those things, I think rules lawyering has a quality to it that is very destructive, but you can also design to enable it to be pro-social, and you can also engage with it in pro-social ways.
Yeah, this is so. This is so the metaphor for Look, I'll give a quick shout out to Michel Foucault and the way that people's bodies have been medicalized, and the way that that is the way that is bad. But I have these conversations with my students often after we're reading Foucault or Judith Butler or something, and they really want whatever it is that is important to them about their identity and the way that they feel that the system has mistreated them. They really want that part of their identity to be, I don't know, solidified or confirmed by the very system that has mistreated them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when I suggest to sort of like maybe like a strategic essentialism, like, no, F the system, what you want is to give the system what you want. They tend to they tend to I'm painting a lot of students here, and certainly not all of them, but they tend to
I know
what
you're talking about, because I see it amongst my friends, right? Like, it's a thing that is a common conversation amongst people in my life, is the exact thing you're describing.
Yeah, do you want to talk about it if you can and relate it to games? Whatever you want, because I'm here to hear from you, not to say my own stuff.
Oh, I think the thing you're describing is, I see it often as well. It is the same kind of like people saying like, oh, like, am I, like, how can I actually be autistic if I don't have a diagnosis, right? Like, I need to get a diagnosis because I need to feel present myself. I need a doctor to prescribe me hormones. I can't just get hormones myself, right? This idea, and then like, oh, I need a therapist. I need them to understand me. And like, to view yourself in alliance with the medical system as opposed to the medical system as a tool of control is, I think, a really common impulse among marginalized people who have been medicalized, because the medical system views as they view the medical system as gatekeepers for validation, right?
Yeah.
And that produces a lot of that kind of like, well, how do I, where's that? I think that's almost the naive relationship with the non-game system, right? The medical system is not a game, right? It is just, that's not a game. That's an actual thing.
Yes.
There's many things I can say about that thing I just said, but we have to treat the medical system as a system. We can't treat it like a game. To engage with it, there is kind of the naive perspective of like, well, I'm going to simply play the game the way it says to do, and I will get the things it says I will. And then there is the experienced player, the speedrunner, I guess, or the metagamer, the rules lawyer, who understands that the medical system is bullshit, that the rewards it's offering are worthless, and they figure out how to instrumentalize it and to use it to get the other things they need for the actual game. I think, I've been thinking about this partially for many reasons. One of them, in Seven Part Pact, there's a very funny little thing I've done, which is that there's the rules of the game, like and then there's also the laws of the pact, which are the laws wizards hold each other to. And if a wizard breaks the law, the other wizards will take them to court. There'll be a wizard court. And then it's decided on whether or not the punishment is just, and the wizard is expected to go along with it. People will all the time ask me, like, hey, can my wizard do XYZ? And I'll say, well, it's against the laws of the pact. I believe it to be against the laws of the pact. If your pact feels that way, they could take you to trial about it. And then players realize, hey, wait a second. The laws of the pact are not enforced by the rules of the game, right? The laws of the pact present themselves to be a set of rules. They're actually just a set of, they're pretending to be game rules. They're and I think similarly, we exist in a world right now where there's two sets of rules. There's two sets of systems at play. One of them is the legal system that we have been told is this legitimizing force, and there's a second system, which is the actual system of power and capital and value and commodity and all the things that are happening underneath, that are like the actual thing that Marx is talking about when Marx talks about that. And I think part of the reason why liberals are so doofy is because they think that the game is the rules they've been told of the game, and so they're trying really hard to play that well, and they're like metagaming that without understanding that isn't actually, like, in the same way that, like, if you try to metagame and like speedrun the medical system to get the rewards of the medical system, that's kind of a worthless thing to do. Right? It doesn't matter if you rules lawyer the laws of the pact, because that is just to convince other wizards that you're right. And all that matters there is rhetorical skill. It does not matter whether or not you can find a loophole in the laws of the pact, because they'll just throw you, they'll imprison you or strip you of your magic or whatever anyway. So there's kind of like what is actually the rules of the system versus what does the system tell you are the rules of the system.
Yeah, I could not agree more about the claim about doofy liberals. I mean, I have these conversations all the time, right? And it's like, and they're like, well, sure, this is how the world works. But if you want to change it, we have to go to the political system and change the rules of the political system. And then once we've changed the rules of the political system through some sort of unclear process, the real system will then be forced to change. And I'm like, no, it's the exact opposite way. You change
I just
the
grab
world.
the tail and I shake it back and forth. Yeah. The whole dog will get wagged.
Yes, it's insane. And
well, that's the thing that's funny about games, right? Is because games are also self-reinforcing, right? A game says this is what, a game tells you its rules, the text tells you the rules, and there's nothing outside of the game that enforces that. And so there's kind of this interesting thing that can happen where you go like, 7-part pact, you're like, well, we can't rewrite the pact unless we get all the wizards to agree, and we can't actually do that unless we allow the equilibrium to get unbalanced this way or that way, and so it'll cause big problems. So, and then you're like, well, wait a second, the only reason we understand the equilibrium works that way is because that is how it's been presented to the wizards. What if we ignore, like, what if that's not true? Like, what happens, right? Like, and so you kind of start to like realize that questioning the rules of the game is questioning the logic that has been presented to you by the liberal patriarchal society that you are operating under, right? And so it kind of becomes this microcosm of like, well, if we just simply disagree, what happens next? And that kind of, I think, is really fruitful. I think that Triangle Agency is a very good example of this. It's a game by Caleb Zane Hewitt and Sean Ireland, that where you play as these bureaucrats working for a company responsible for imprisoning anomalous magical creatures. Very common theme across a lot of games. What makes Triangle Agency special is that there's commendations and demerits that the GM hands out. And when you succeed at missions, you fail at missions. You start to realize that succeeding and failing at missions doesn't matter. Right? Succeeding at missions does not get you anything more or less than failing at a mission does, right? You still get your paycheck at the end of the week, right? Commendations and demerits aren't actually, like, demerits are not actually punishments. They're framed as punishments. You're told by society that it's a punishment. When you play the game, it's just another meta currency. And I think in a similar way, right, we can understand, like, okay, the system that we've been taught presents, it says, hey, a diagnosis is a reward. And then you understand a diagnosis is frequently a punishment, right?
Yeah.
You're told it's a reward. It's actually a punishment. And these sorts of things that are really unclear when you're naively believing the logic of the game is presented to you become really illuminating when you take on a rules lawyering, metagaming, counter reading perspective, right? When you engage with the game in a hostile fashion, collaboratively with your friends, productively, right? That like this is a useful thing when done in a space that actually wants to do it, you know?
Yeah, that's wonderful. I mean, again, I keep falling back on my classroom experiences, but they're just so relevant. I get
Mm-hmm.
at the beginning of every semester, I get emails from the accommodations branch of the university, and every once in a while, there's one that I have to read carefully and make sure the student has those accommodations. But for the
Mm-hmm.
most part, it's this student gets extra time on exams. And I don't give exams. They are not a
Yeah.
part of my
Yeah.
teaching, and I'm not required
Mm-hmm.
to. And so then I just, I just get to ignore them
Yeah.
because the only accommodation is 50% time on exam. And this is precisely as you say, it's a reward to the students. I jumped through the hoops. I got my diagnosis. Now I get this reward. And in their physics class, it is a reward. And then in my class, it's like, look, you're gonna have to talk about this stuff. You're gonna have to write about it, and you're gonna have to present
Mm-hmm.
what you did, regardless of what the medical system said about you. And they're
Mm-hmm.
never pissed off. They're never
Yeah.
like, oh no, I want my
Yeah.
token for 50%. They're like, oh, thank God.
Yeah,
Thank God.
because also because right, 50% off is so. I mean, it's so nothing, right? It doesn't like
Yeah.
exams are evil, and you and I both know that, right? I think like
Yeah.
we're on the same page about the failures of the educational system.
Yeah, that's not hard to be on the same page about.
Yeah, and so it's like I don't know, like the system, like the 50% off is a small band-aid on top of a larger problem. And if you're approaching each other compassionately, engaging with each other as people, and you're kind of doing all of the stuff that's really important that I assume you're doing because you're an anarchist and all
I'm
that,
trying anyway. I'm
I
trying.
assume I feel you. I assume, and so like that's the thing that they actually want, is to get their professors to treat them a little bit like people.
Yeah.
And like if you can't get them to treat you like people, like through them treating you like a person, you can get them to treat you like a person by like articulating your requests formally through a complex and miserable
Yeah.
bureaucracy that ultimately does nothing, you know? So I'm very sympathetic to that, but it's also, I think, is a good example of like that is a uh learning how to game the system is necessary when the system is something hostile and antagonistic to you. Uh, I think that frequently there's been kind of a conflation between like, well, if you're gaming the system, that either means you are playing hostilely towards the authority. If we come back to like the idea of the game of the authority, right? Where does the authority lie? If the GM is the authority, playing in a hostile fashion is against the GM, right? That's antagonistic play. If the game lies in the rules we've all agreed to, playing hostilely goes against like the thing we've all agreed to, right? It's like, well, we all agreed to this. Why are you being a dick about it? But then also, if the thing that we are agreeing to, we understand to be coercive, to be manipulative, to be facetious and unfair, then playing hostilely towards it becomes really fruitful, because it's like, well, we're all still trying to maintain this, but we're also engaging with it, knowing that our characters in our world, right? The thing about Triangle Agency is it's like, you don't want to be working for this shit job, right? You're underpaid, underappreciated drones. You have more in common with the people you're hunting down than you do with your bosses. What does that mean? What on earth could that be about? With 7-Part Pact, it's like, hey, you're a wizard, you're a man. To be a man sucks. Even if you're a cis man, it's hard. It's exhausting, right? You're never enough. Let alone if you're not a cis man and you're having to do this, right? And so there's all this stuff and so it's like, you want to be, there's a version of you can imagine that's free, right? There's a version of you can imagine that is legitimate, that is what you want to be. And the game says that the way to be your true self is to be an evil wizard. And you can play the game and lean into that and have a lot of fun being an evil wizard. You can also be like, well, actually, I don't want to be an evil wizard. I know my true self is different. I need to get the fuck out of here. I need to tear this thing down. How the hell do I do that? And that is a very fruitful way of engaging with that.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. This takes me back to this idea of like, if you're struggling against the dungeon master,
Mm-hmm.
via rules lawyering as opposed to struggling against the challenges that the DM is creating for you.
Yeah.
That you're actually you and the DM are on the same side.
Mm-hmm.
The DM is sending orcs to kill you, and you're trying to kill the orcs. But that's in this mutual understanding. I think the BDSM metaphor works really well. There is what you're doing. You're being bound. But because you want to be. And then when you start rules lawyering it, you're calling into question the entire enterprise, which in the case of a game that you have joined with your friends voluntarily to
Mm-hmm.
play is a hostile act when you're
Mm-hmm.
this is why the liberals cannot handle the anarchists, because when we're showing the flaws of the legal system, they're like, no, first we have to shore up the legal system and make sure
Mm-hmm.
everyone who questions the legal system goes to jail, then we can make the prisons better. And it's like, wait, it's
If the system, if the game is perfect, if the system is perfect, the laws are perfect, it always produces perfect outcomes, right? The liberal belief that if you make the game perfect, it will produce justice. Misunderstood, like it's just, and I think similarly, there is often an idea in games that if you make the perfect game, it will produce perfect play. But I think maybe actually instead we can understand that that is also flipped, right? That there is play and it is fun, and if you've got a good group of friends, you can have, there's a thing I once read that was someone who works in making video games, like solo video games. Oh no, this was a review that Ben Yahtzee did about a competitive, like a cooperative team based game, where he said multiplayer games have a fundamental advantage over solo games because I could be with my friends in the woods and just hit each other with a fish for hours, and we'd have fun if we were a little drunk. And so there's like a thing that RPGs have in its advantage, which is that you get a group of people together, they will play, right? They will have fun and play. The rules, and so it's like, what are the rules doing, right? The rules are kind of finessing that play, but like in the same way that like perfect rules don't, like in the same way that like perfect laws don't produce justice. You need to have the justice, and then the laws need to kind of emerge around and through that justice, right? You have to have something beyond structure to emanate that. Similarly, rules don't produce play, right? Play is shaped by rules. And I think that one way we can do that is by making really interesting rules that sit comfortably with what we want to do to play, right? The rules can be a channel bringing us with the play we want, but the rules aren't producing the play, right? We're bringing the play, we're moving it through the rules. So what if instead we make the rules, that's Wanderhome is like, well, Wanderhome is like, let's get rid of almost every rule we need. Let's just have the play, and let's have the couple of rules be present to kind of give it a rough shape. But like most of it's just going to kind of be in the we're just playing. We're one step away from make believe. But we can also have a game where it's like, well, there's 100 rules and they don't fit. They feel wrong. We strain against them. A rule that says, whenever you talk to someone, you must insult them, right? That feels wrong. You don't want to. You try to find ways around it. And so you're trying to do the play you want to have, but the rules are getting in the way. And that can be really fruitful and exciting and pleasurable as well, right? And so I think that's kind of the big, like, that's kind of the big thing I'm interested in, is like, well, if we're going to live in a world in which the laws at every turn impede justice, right? As a corollary, what is the fun to be found in a thing where the rules at every turn impede play? And the answer to me is there's a lot of fun, because, there's catharsis and there's kind of existing in things that, are evocative of our own world and breaking free of them, right? And it's not for everyone, of course, but I've never made games that are for everyone. So
Oh my God, Jay! I mean, it sounds like you're summing up. Are you ready to be done? We should certainly be at least heading towards done. It's up to you.
the danger of me is I can keep going. I'm dangerous for podcasters because I can keep going, but you call the shots. I'm here.
Yeah, well, I mean, look,
I'm very also good at delivering final lines, so don't worry about that.
Well, you nailed that one. What I would say is I can keep going, but Jay, let's just do this again sometime. How does that
I would
sound?
love that. That sounds wonderful. I would adore that.
Bad. Yeah. Well, I mean, so here's I guess this will be my last question. I think we've done an amazing job of connecting, these questions about games and getting to understand why and how people play, but also how you can understand how theories of political change can be, if not generated, but at least illuminated by
Mm-hmm.
games. The final question that I have is, what do you? It's true that your games aren't for everyone. I'm wondering if there is, though, a kind of game that I want to defend right now, which
Mm-hmm.
is a kind of, a generic, totally rules bound
Mm-hmm.
kind of turned your mind off game, whether it's Tetris or whatever,
Yeah.
without falling into the new thing, which is the loot boxes and the game. In other words, to
Yeah.
play a game in a flow state where
Mm-hmm.
there's relatively little friction and it's a reprieve from the stress of life,
Mm-hmm.
seems to me to almost no longer exist because everything is roguelite or loot boxes. All
I
of the
think I
games.
think
Yeah, go ahead.
Balatro, like as just
Mm.
an easy example of a game that came out like last year, right?
Okay, well, is Balatro a game that is designed to hook you rather than intrigue you? This is the difference between Balatro and solitaire, which I know
And
Balatro is a lot more
I
fun than
mean,
solitaire, but it's more dangerous, isn't it? I don't
I
know.
think I don't know. I've actually argued with my friends about this where I think there's questions of like, so there's a very powerful book called Addiction by Design, by Natasha Schul, really intense book. That really, it's the closest you get to being like, is game design bad, right? It's kind of
Yeah.
it's about the game design of slot machines. And you realize, I think, the thing you and I are both talking about, most games are inefficient slot machines, right? The difference between Fortnite and a slot machine is that Fortnite has reduced the frequency. It's just a math equation, right? It's like you've got
Mm.
X customers, they spend Y time, and per hour they spend Z dollars. And the trick is balancing that math equation to make as much
Mhm.
money as possible. And so if you can lower Z to increase X and Y, that's what Fortnite is doing, right? TikTok can like lower Z a lot to really increase X and Y, right? And then it's like if you've got 10 million customers and they're each spending 20 hours on your platform and they're each spending 1 cent, that is still that's still a lot of money, right? So these things kind of like the way they it's all about that balancing thing. And I think Balatro, bit of an edge case because it is still it's reduced the Z quality to zero, right? It is not interested in extracting money from its players. You spend $10, you have the game, you can play it forever.
Yeah.
And I think that the big challenge that I have is that as game designers, especially video game designers, but analog game designers are not 100% exempt from this, is that they have figured out, they've perfected mindless obsession, right? Like effectively the sensation of hypnotism, the sensation of trance, the sensation of flow state is a perfected art, right? We can do that to someone now forever. I can hook you in the machine forever. And that's fine and that's good. And if people want to make those games, they should. I do think there are more than you think. I think it's just that Solitaire and Tetris are less effective at that than Balatro, but Balatro is the thing that you get when you continue the technology, right? When you continue the science of that further, you get Balatro. We will make even more efficient and effective Balatros down the line. And I don't want to do that because I think that there is an abundance of things that let you turn your brain off right now. I, as a game designer, am not. I don't think that me putting more of that into the world will do much of a moral good. I don't think people who do that are bad. I just don't think it's. I think that it's. We have a culture right now of finding ways to turn your brain off, right? Of finding things that can cocomelon you, right? Like that, like they can just kind of lose you in the sauce. And I want to make games that make you think, right? That make you have to like stop and like think about it and like get frustrated and like feel negative feelings, right? I want games about type 2 fun. I want games that produce that friction, that produce that discomfort that you have to like talk it through with your friends to be like, what do we do here? Like that to me is what I think is actually rewarding as an art form, is the capacity to make a thing that, in the same way that like we can, like you could make a book that is just really easy to read, and there's a lot of books that are really easy to read, and I'm glad they exist, but I don't want to write books that are just really straightforwardly easy to read. I often think about what Umberto Eco said. I read after reading Name of the Rose, he has an essay at the back of the edition of Name of the Rose I read. In it, he talks. Are you familiar with Name of the Rose?
Yes,
Not everyone in the audience might be.
Yeah, sure.
It is a murder mystery set in a 14th century Italian monastery, written from that perspective. And the first 100 pages are a slog. Right, they're just a really exhausting thing to read. They go deep into the world. It's slow. It's it's really digging in. And Umberto Eco's editors said, cut it down, right? Get that out of there, right? Make it punchy, make it short. He was like, no. It's really important that it's a slog because it needs to be like climbing up the mountain to get the wisdom of the old master, right? You can't just have it hand delivered to you because it doesn't mean anything. You have to like really fight your way through it. You have to like get through that. And I think to me, there's nothing wrong with making games that are easy. I think it's important that there are those games. I think that Wanderhome is not. Wanderhome is part of that to a certain degree, right? I will make games like that in the future, right? I just think right now, I think what we really need more of and what's really important for me is making games that don't just make you turn off your brain and enter into flow state, but get you to talk to people, right? And get you to say, I don't understand this. Let's make sense of it. And like, let's bang our heads against it and figure it out. Because I think that we need a bit less flow state and maybe a bit more thinking it through, right? We need a bit less, responding based on instinctive trigger finger emotions and a bit more dwelling on it and contemplating it and coming to a conclusion more organically and more thoroughly.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. That's a great place to end.
I told you I could bang these out.
You banged it out.
Mm-hmm.
Jay, thank you so much. Your games have been a huge inspiration and a huge source of joy.
So
and look, this conversation was fantastic. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Graham. Thank you for having me. If anyone is interested in my thoughts on game design, you're welcome to check me out on Blue Sky, where I am Jay Dragsky on Blue Sky. You can also go to the to my Patreon, patreon.com/Possum Creek. Use URL soon to change, where you can read my articles, see the games I'm working on, see 7-Part Pact in development.
All right, sounds good. I'll try and have links up there. And thanks again.
Yeah, thank you so much.